All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be volume 2 in a series that I started a while ago called Don't Self-Destruct Black Man. And of course, this will be the second edition. The first edition, I believe, was featuring Mr. Jamal Anderson, the former star running back of the Atlanta Falcons. This episode will be featuring Mr. Doc Gooden, the former superstar pitcher of the New York Mets from the mid to late 80s into the mid 90s, but by the mid 90s, he was pretty much done. He had a brief resurgence with the New York Yankees in the mid to late 90s, but for the most part, his career was done as a star or superstar pitcher by the late 1980s, and it's very difficult to convey to those of you out there who don't know who this man was, how popular he was from 1983 or 84 all the way through, I would say, the early 90s. Dwight Gooden was so overpowering as a pitcher in the mid-1980s that even after the hard drugs clearly started to take their toll in the late 1980s into the early 1990s, and he was nowhere near the pitcher that he once was, New York Mets fans and baseball fans overall still hung on to the thought that he might have some type of renaissance, which he really never did as a Met. Once again, he went to the Yankees, he pitched a no-hitter, and I believe he won a World Series with them in the late 90s. I think either 96 or 98. One of those years, he was on the World Series winning team of the New York Yankees. But due to the fact that baseball is not quite as popular as a nationwide pastime as it was in the 1980s, there's not even anyone pitching today to compare him to, because he was a phenomenon, especially due to the fact that he was a black American pitcher. He won the Rookie of the Year award, I believe, in 1984. In 1985, he won the Cy Young Award. If I remember correctly, his record was 24-4, and he had somewhere around a sub-2 ERA, maybe slightly above 2 ERA. And he had arguably the best fastball and curveball in all of baseball. Both he and Strawberry were basically taking the city of New York by storm in the early 80s. It was Strawberry who came up in 83, not Dwight Gooden. Dwight Gooden, I believe, came up in 84 and won the Rookie of the Year. And as I've already stated, not only with Doc Gooden, but also with Darryl Strawberry, drugs just totally curtailed their careers. I started watching baseball in 1990. By that time, Doc Gooden was already a proverbial shell of his former self. That was also Darryl Strawberry's last year on the Mets. I'll never forget it. He hit in the high 30s home runs that year. And the next year, he went to the LA Dodgers, had a very poor first half of the season, and then led the National League in home runs in the second half of that season, if I remember correctly. I'm talking about Darryl Strawberry. But those two players have been inextricably linked because they came up around the same time. They won a World Series with the Mets. But when Mets fans look back at that time period, they always feel like there was a lot left on the shelf. There was a lot left on the table, because that mid-1980s New York Mets team was one of the most talented of all time. But they came up in the wrong era, because that was smack dab in the middle of the cocaine, Wall Street, crack epidemic. And they were all snorting, smoking that shit, injecting that shit. And it messed up a lot of their lives. And that's why this is going to be a part of the series, Don't Self-Destruct So-Called Black Man, or Don't Self-Destruct Black Man. Because a lot of you cats out there are very talented, and you're going to hit pivotal moments in your life where you're going to feel compelled to fit in with the crowd. And it's always the case that one of the conditions of fitting in is that you're going to have to compromise who you are as a person. They're going to hand you something or tell you to snort something or smoke something just so that you can become a part of the clique or the crew. And the reason why that's done is because most people who are addicts are inwardly embarrassed at their weakness. And the only way that they can offset their embarrassment is by getting those around them to embrace the same sickness and weakness that they have. That's how they feel comfortable. Not by elevating themselves and those around them, but by pulling everyone around them down with them. It's very similar to the dynamic of young people who were molested as children. Oftentimes they grow up to molest children themselves. It's a way for them to pass that demon onward. But just getting back to the point, when we look at Doc Gooden, he certainly is a cautionary tale. As I've already stated, for the first 4 or 5 years of his career, he was arguably the most popular player in Major League Baseball. And after he fell off, people still romanticized that great time period where he was at his peak so much that they held on. It was almost like someone who's been married for 10 years. And the first 5 years were great and the last 5 years were terrible, but you didn't want to get a divorce because you were hoping for a return to those halcyonic days. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
All right, this sucks. Dwight Gooden, baseball legend, New York Mets legend, was arrested for cocaine possession again. Back in trouble with substance abuse. This has been following Dwight Gooden for his entire professional adult life, really. It was since he first joined the major leagues back in the 80s, and now he's 54 years old.
I remember watching a feature on Dwight Gooden in which he stated that he first got into drugs as a way to alleviate some of the pressure that he felt in trying to impress his father. If I remember correctly, he was raised down in Florida, and that's how he first got caught up with the wrong crowd. He was trying to find a way to relieve the pressure that he had subjected himself to in trying to impress his dad, because baseball was one of the few ways that they could connect.
In New Jersey on June 7th, he was pulled over by the police. They searched his car. They found 2 baggies of cocaine. They arrested him for possession. They also say he was under the influence during the stop. This is like the 3rd or 4th, maybe even 5th time he's been arrested for cocaine possession dating back to the 80s. Remember, like, in 19...
And you can see the brother has that sunken in face, like a crackhead. He's not all there upstairs. The physical many times is a reflection of the spiritual.
He tested positive for coke right after the Mets won the World Series in '95. He missed the entire season for failing a drug test. He did an 8-month stint in jail in 2006. 2010, he crashed his car while under the influence of drugs while his 5-year-old son was in the car.
I mean, it's a lifelong struggle for. Do you realize how talented that this guy was?
Extraordinarily talented. It basically was Doc Gooden, Brett Saberhagen, and Roger Clemens who were looked at as or viewed as the best young pitchers in the major leagues during that time period.
First onto the scene as a 19-year-old pitcher, won Rookie of the Year, won the Cy Young Award.
My granddad still maintains that the ball, he's never seen the ball come out of it.
Right, and he's still...
Dwight Gooden would customarily hit triple digits on the radar gun, even into the early to mid-90s when he was no longer the same pitcher.
Had a great career despite the struggles that Evan has kind of...
It was him and Darryl Strawberry got into drugs together back in the 80s, and they just couldn't get off.
Each one of them didn't just have Hall of Fame talent. They had all-time great talent.
Yeah, and look, man, addiction is a hell of a thing. We talk about it a lot. Addiction is a real thing. It's not a myth. People get addicted, and it's very difficult for them to get clean and sober. And Dwight...
And normally addiction is a facade to cover up some other issue that they have. And that's really what needs to be addressed. And so many brothers are battling issues from their childhood that they cover up by joining gangs, joining destructive cliques, joining groups, becoming addicted to drugs. So you have to address that issue that you have. Don't try to cover it up with drugs, because the only thing that's going to happen is eventually your so-called friends are going to disavow themselves of you, and you're going to become another contributor to the prison industrial complex. And once you enter into that beast system, no one is going to care about you.
An example of that, of a guy who's talked about publicly how he wanted to be clean and sober. Just in 2016, he gave a whole interview, talked about how he'd gotten in with the church and was really trying to dedicate and focus his life on it, and just couldn't beat it. I mean, how many stories have we done at TMZ and TMZ Sports over the years?
Hey brothers, the best way to get over a drug addiction is to never take drugs in the first place.
You hear these guys who are they're just in the grips of addiction, and they just can't break out, man. It's the saddest thing.
Very hard. By the way, this is a young man. Doc Gooden's 54 years.
Relatively young, but way too old to still be conforming to the same weaknesses. But who knows? I can't really relate to someone who has that chemical dependency like that.
Like, this gives you a sort of gauge of how much life he has left to live if he can get this thing under control. Yeah. But it's been something that's been dogging him. Right.
Well, it's good that the brother puts a positive spin on Doc Gooden's potential, because he still does have potential as a human being. He's still marketable. He can still make money by signing autographs, etc. It would be nice to see him turn his life around. But I make these videos more for you brothers out there, you younger cats, who have not subjected yourselves to this type of dynamic yet, because once you're pulled into that web, it's very difficult to come out of it. Once your body becomes accustomed to those drugs, it's almost like how we need food, water, and air. That's how a junkie or an addict needs that drug. So to tell them just get over it and move past it, they spend the rest of their life thinking about that drug or that alcohol. So hopefully brothers will not succumb to that, especially for the sake of fitting in with the crowd. Most of these people that you come across in life that you think are so important are not going to last very long. And you're going to be left sitting by yourself saying, why did I do this to myself? Why did I compromise myself for this person who doesn't matter?
Him for so long. I hope I'm wrong, but you just get the feeling it's something that he's always going to be dealing with, because in 30 years he hasn't been able to kick it.
Yeah, well,
tough, man.
I mean, look,
I love this dude. He's a hero, man. He's a hero in New York City, man. People love him.
Yeah, he's huge in New York City, no doubt about it.
Oh, my Mets fans, they love this guy.
Yeah, well, to Van's point, though, I mean, it's not over for him.
No,
He's
it's not
54 years
over.
old, and he's got friends or people.
The Mets had a huge black fan base in the mid-'80s because of Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry.
Care about him, like you said, Babcock, and hopefully, some people will reach out and try to help him, get on the right path.
So that's basically it on that, brothers. Hopefully the Most High will give Doc Gooden the strength to overcome this addiction. But once again, the best way to avoid addiction is to never do drugs in the first place. Find something productive to be addicted to. Hopefully it's your passion and it's something that you can use to be constructive as opposed to destructive. God bless. Peace.